knows the Republican leadership quite well. Steny Hoyer joining me now. Thank you for the time. First of all, we heard from your Maryland colleague, fellow Democrat Chris Van Hollen, but what is your takeaway from what's happened this evening?
Well, first of all, I think it shows pretty clearly what the problem of getting to a balanced agreement, a bipartisan agreement is. You have a large number of Republicans who will not even support their own speaker's proposal at $1 million. And as a result, it's been very, very difficult for John Boehner to enter into a deal because in order for him to do that, he's got to have followers. To exercise leadership, you've got to have people who are willing to follow. And we have seen throughout this Congress over the last 2 years an unwillingness in the Republican conference to come to a compromise. In democracy, you need to compromise. If you're going to make progress, if you're going to make sure the economy is growing, you're going to need compromise. And what has happened here tonight was we have seen a stark example of the refusal of the Republican conference to even agree with its own leadership on coming to some type of agreement. I'm glad this failed tonight because I'm hopeful that it will impel Speaker Boehner, Majority Leader Cantor, to enter into serious negotiations and understand that they can get a majority of their caucus. They're not going to get all their caucus. And if we come to an agreement, a balanced agreement, that the president supports, I will tell you that both Leader Pelosi and I are going to help get that passed.
Have you had any conversation with your Republican counterparts this evening in the wake of this?
I have not since this happened. I have had conversations with them today earlier, and I made this representation to them. And I've had conversations with Speaker Boehner. America needs us to come to an agreement. Our economy needs us to come to an agreement. The sequester is not an option. Raising taxes on working Americans is not an option. We need to come to an agreement. The President of the United States, I think, as everybody has seen very clearly, has moved towards the Republican position, not because he agrees with that position, but because he understands, as President of the United States, that it is necessary for us to have this Congress come together and make a balanced judgment of how we can put our country on a fiscally sustainable path. I would hope that this failure tonight, that Speaker Boehner will turn this into a victory for America by leading at least a portion of his party with our party to a bipartisan balanced agreement.
Do you think he's willing to give up his speaker's gavel to get a deal done? Because there are a lot of people suggesting tonight this was a vote of confidence John Boehner didn't get.
Well, I think that's a question for John Boehner to answer. But John Boehner is the speaker in this Congress. John Boehner has been discussing this with the President of the United States. I hope those discussions are escalated, intensified over the next 24, 72, 96 hours. We're coming back here, obviously, next week. Nobody wants to see the sequester happen. Nobody wants to see us, or at least I don't, and Leader Pelosi doesn't want to see us go over the cliff. We don't want to see the economy traumatized. So I'm hopeful that John Boehner, who is now the Speaker, and is going to be the Speaker for the next 10 days at least, will have the opportunity to assist and work with the President of the United States and with Democrats and Republicans to get this country on the right track with a balanced deal.
Do Democrats, the President, have any obligation at this point to move even further to try and help John Boehner win the kind of support within his conference that he clearly didn't have tonight for this proposal?
Look, I think that the President has moved a far pace, as you know, from his original starting position. He's done so because he is committed to getting an agreement and understands that compromise is necessary. And very frankly, we have not seen any movement on behalf of the Republicans that was credible. For instance, John Boehner offered $800 billion in revenues. He offered it not in tax increases, because obviously his caucus will not support any revenue increase. 65%, 70% of the American people understand that we've got to ask those who have the most to pay a little more. They're for that. It's not a question of the American people not being for this. They understand you need a balanced agreement to move forward. They want restraints in spending. They want to make sure there's not waste, fraud, and abuse. But they also want to make sure that we have a fair deal, not a skewed deal. So I think the president's moved pretty far. Now John Boehner has to make a decision. Am I prepared to leave 60 or 70 of my most hardline members behind and sit down with 130, 140, 150 of my members, with 120, 130, 150, maybe more Democrats in the House of Representatives, and enact and send to the Senate a balanced deal that the President of the United States says he will sign? If we can do that, it's the biggest thing we can do to assist this economy grow and create jobs and give relief and confidence to the working Americans.
You've seen, I mentioned what's happened to futures this evening, the reaction in the markets to this. How do you think the market dynamic will affect what's happening here? If we see a sell-off in the markets, is it going to drive a deal?
Well, let me tell you, when we voted on the TARP bill, when we had the crisis in 2008, and it originally was brought on the floor, and it failed. The stock market went down over 500 points while we were voting, and 777 points that day in September of 2008. It had an effect, and we came back, as you recall, 4 days later and passed the bill. In that instance, of course, a Republican president asked a Democratic Congress to save the economy and pass that bill. The Democrats voted with President Bush. It was the Republicans that left President Bush on that vote. And they never did get a majority of their members to vote with President Bush. I would hope that John Boehner and Majority Leader candidate would lead at least a majority of their caucus, with a majority of our caucus, to pass a bipartisan agreement. And if they do, the stock market will go up. Confidence in the economy will be restored, and we're going to grow jobs and give confidence to working Americans.
It's an optimistic view. I'm not sure everyone's going to share that optimism this evening about what might play out.
Well, Peter, I didn't say that was what's going to play out,
sure,
but I don't think it's optimistic. I think it's very realistic that if we get to a balanced agreement, that the president will sign, the Senate can pass, and we can pass in the House of Representatives bipartisan basis, there is no doubt in my mind that it will give the economy a shot in the arm, and we're going to see a more robust economy than we would otherwise see, period.
All right, the number 2 Democrat in the House of Representatives, Steny Hoyer, on what's playing out this evening, some of the disarray among the Republican colleagues that you have here in the House. Thank you for the time. We appreciate your reaction. And again, the headline here, Matt, from the House of Representatives, Capitol Hill, is that John Boehner's Plan B has been pulled from the floor because of a lack of support among his fellow Republicans. The question now, what is the next move by the Speaker, and how ultimately can he and the President sit down and try and work out a compromise that avoids the fiscal cliff? We'll send it back to you, New York.